Hello everyone and welcome to this Your Overseas Home webinar. My name is Rosie, I'm a senior copywriter here at Your Overseas Home. Today we'll be chatting with Fabien Pelissier from Fab Insurance about the key steps of relocating to France. It's great to see so many of you with us today, whether you are watching live or tuning in on demand. So before we get started, Fabien, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Fab does?
Yes. And first and foremost, hopefully we'll live up to our name by the end of this session, and we'll try to be as fabulous as we can. But yeah, no, joke aside, so I'm Fabien, Managing Director and founder of Fab French Insurance and Fab Expat Services. We've been helping the English-speaking community move and relocate to France since 2015. So from visa applications to residency permits, and obviously including the most sexiest topic of them all, which is insuring your visa or your car or property, and all that goes with insurance. But usually it starts with a consultation for a visa or residency application in France. And that's what we've been doing for almost a decade now, and hopefully that's what we'll keep on doing for years to come.
Lovely, thank you. Before I hand over to you and your presentation, I'll just let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it on demand at a later date. And at the end of the webinar, once Fab is finished, Fabien, sorry, we were just talking about this before we started going live, and I knew that I would do it just because we'd said it. Sorry, at the end of the webinar, we'll open floor up to questions. If you have any as we go along, feel free to pop them in the questions tab. It's just on the right-hand side of your screen. Yeah, so over to you, Fabien.
Okay, well, fantastic. So, and please continue doing mistakes. I mean, Fab is much easier to pronounce than Fabien. Fabien, I know is not English compatible. I mean, it's harder to pronounce. And especially often, even if you try your best, very often it sounds like the feminine version of my name, which is Fabien. So I'm all up with Fab. I'm good with that. Thanks. And hopefully, again, it's going fabulous. So yeah, we're here today to talk about, as the title goes, from 90 days in France to forever. And we'll go through the seven main steps. There could be much more or much less, depending on how we see this journey, but basically the idea today is to understand what goes or what works behind the hood when you want to exceed that 90 days allowance. And by the way, this first misconception we're seeing often, the 90 days allowance is not just 90 days in France. For non-Europeans, it's 90 days within the Schengen area in general, not just France. So if you're like 20 days in Spain and 10 days in France, then boom, here goes your allowance. You need to be off the Schengen area for another 90 days before you've built up an allowance again. But all that being said, let's deep dive into the first step, which is finding your place in France, which conveniently matches one of the first and main requirements for a long-term visa application, which is you need to have an address in France if you want to apply for a French long-term visa. So to get an address, obviously you need to have found either a property that you are buying, will be buying, or have bought, or a rental accommodation. So it's the first thing, rental accommodations. Many people ask about Airbnbs and JIT and stuff like this. I mean, you know, like, I'll start with an Airbnb and then I'll find a place. And can I apply for my visa with an Airbnb accommodation or something like that? So, well, the short answer is, in theory, no. You have to have either a long-term rental accommodation or have bought a property. But the visa being political, it depends on where you're from. So some countries have more flexibilities than others, like some French consulates might actually accept an Airbnb accommodation. For example, in the US, at the minute, they tend to be a bit more flexible about that. Unfortunately, not in the UK, not in Australia, not in South Africa, other countries, not as much. But again, it's political. So obviously my advice is always to try to match the requirements as per the official guidelines. So how to find that accommodation? Long-term contracts, rental, Obviously, especially this year with the Olympics, it's kind of hard to secure. Well, we do offer services where we can help you guys find your gem in France, and so you can get started with a rental contract at first. But rentals, like, let's be honest, rentals are very difficult to secure, especially if you are looking at a remote place or a very busy place, because it's offer and demand. If you are competing against a French native who also wants the same accommodation as you, well, the property owner will have a file of someone who can have a deposit, who is French and liable in France, versus an expat. So they'll very often go for the French native, not because they don't like expats, but just because it's more secure for them. So that's what makes the rental industry a bit difficult. However, again, especially if you have the assistance of a French native such as us, we very often manage to get things done. It's just that what I'm saying is there's not much room for negotiation, because it's more like find a place, and then once you're in France, come up with the accommodation. Then, in terms of a property purchase, obviously, I won't delve into the specifics of going with a real estate agent. That's their job. So if you have one that can assist you, well, by the very definition, then you're in good hands, or should be. But rather, if you're trying to hunt for this on your own, the two biggest websites in France are actually, one is called seloger.com. Maybe someone from the team can write it in the chat box, or we'll share it afterwards if you like. This one is available even from abroad. But the biggest one, especially for peer-to-peer transactions, is called Le Bon Coin. Like literally, it's a good corner, but in French, leboncoin.com. And this one, you have to have a French mobile phone number. But by far, I mean, all the French natives, they'll use this one. So that's kind of the pro tip I'm giving you, because actually, even the professional advisors helping you move to France, they very often don't know about this. It's a French-specific website. Well, it exists in other countries, but not with the same name. Obviously, it's a French name. So these are the pro tips for finding your legal level in France. But now let's go into the second hottest topic, which are the visas. So I'm assuming in this that you are looking for long-term visa and permanently looking in that relocation process in France. So 12-month visa. So first, very important if you're doing this. So the process can be done on your own. You don't need the assistance of anyone. Obviously, we also can help you for a fee if you don't want to have the stress of the process, but everything can be done for free. The application is done online. It starts on a website called francevisa.gov.fr. You can start the process as early as 6 months ahead of the intended arrival date in France. But usually the ideal period is 90 to 30 days away from the intended arrival date. If you're less than 30 days away, you're too late. They won't accept your application because you're too close to the date. So you need to leave at least a 30 days buffer. You'll need to go through an interview in your home country. Most of the time could also be the country of residence if you're living somewhere else. But let's say you're British or you're British, you'll have to book an appointment in the UK. You're from the US, you'll have to book an appointment in the US. This is not an interrogation. They'll review your file to make sure everything is complete. But so you do that online and you book an appointment and then you can move to France. So that visa, to keep it very simple, there are three main tests. So we've touched base on the first one, which is the proof of address. You need to have an address in France, a safe place to live. Makes sense. But the second one is money. Basically, you need to be able to make a living in France. So this one's actually much easier than most people make it. You need to meet France minimum wage, whatever this is, monthly or yearly. So if you have ongoing income, then, well, just type in France minimum wage, which is at the minute roughly 1,400 euros net. That's the net income you're looking at. So France minimum wage, so monthly. Obviously, if you're making more, that's okay. If you have an income in a foreign currency or foreign currencies, that's completely okay as well. Obviously, then you need to consider the currency exchange rate, but that's it. And otherwise, you just have times 12 that amount, which is the yearly minimum wage, basically. And if you have that in savings, that's fine as well. You qualify. And you can have a mix of both. You can have, like, I don't know, 1,000 euros a month income and just top up the missing bit with savings. So 12 times 400, which is roughly 5,000 euros. I've seen the question of Susan, by the way, is 1,400 a month rigid? So as a single person, yes. As a couple, no. And even as a single person, sometimes if you have bought a property in France and have no mortgage, there is a bit of flexibility. Again, it's safer to assume this is a rigid requirement, although in real life, there is a bit of room for this. But as a couple, I mean, we're seeing that all the time. Like, even if you just have 2,000 euros a month or the equivalent again in savings, I've never seen a rejection. So again, considering you don't have a mortgage, for example. So it's just some couple examples, but and same if you have dependents like children. Well, it could be also parents, but that's more rare. Same, they'll just apply like an extra 30% extra income they'll require from you, not twice the income or 3 times or 4 times. It's not one time the income per person. It's actually for one person, yes, and usually again 30% extra per dependent. Yeah, but then it gets a bit more flexible. It's not rigid. Okay, so that was the second test. Sorry, and the third and final test is insurance. Well, not directly. It's actually, you need to have medical coverage in France, which most of the time means you need to have private medical insurance, which we can offer. We guarantee we have the cheapest policies, and we offer a 100% money back guarantee in case of visa rejections. That was, I'm done with the sales page. But if you have, let's say, a European Social Security number active because you've worked in the EU, then you can use that. Or if you are from the UK and have reached state pension age, then you can use the S1 because that's one of the post-Brexit agreements. So you can use that instead. So there are exemptions, but let's say most of the time it's safe to assume that this requirement translates into having private medical insurance, which again, we're more than happy to offer. And here we go. These are the 3 main tests for a visa. Activating your visa. So these couple steps we've mentioned, the first 2 steps, that was to get you into France. Now you're in France. So within the first 90 days, you need to activate your visa. The activation is an online process as well. You'll be sent reminders and a coupon from the visa guys explaining you how to do that. So basically, you won't be left out in the cold. They'll remind you of this. But basically, this is something you need to do with the Administration des Étrangers. That's a website. And you need to get it done online. Once the visa is, so basically, it's an automated process. It's just a way for them to make sure you're paying the activation fee, and that's 225 euros. Then, because you're in France, that also, once it's activated, you also can do a couple of things now. The first one, if you consider the driver license exchange, that's only once you've activated your visa that you can change or start that driver license exchange process. Second thing is the medical appointment. Once the visa has been activated, the site will offer you an appointment with one of their OFI, which is like a governmental body, OFI center, and they'll offer you an appointment. Fear not, there is no way you can fail this. Well, technically yes, but they're not looking for something like, even if you've had cancer, heart problems, whatever, medical history, that doesn't matter. They're looking for signs of contagious disease, like really like old school disease, like consumption and things like that. So that's why they'll have you go through an X-ray and stuff like this, but they're really looking for that kind of stuff. So it's pretty much just to make sure you're not bringing some exotic disease into France. But apart from this, you're fine, especially if they take your, they get you through a wine intake and it's over the roof, then you support the economy. We'll be happy with that. Well, that's a joke. That's it.
I'll be fine then.
Probably don't go there wasted. I mean, it's probably safer. Although that would show you support the economy. So Yeah, so once you've activated, as I was saying, then you can go through the driver license exchange. Why did we do a full step on this? Because even if you come from the UK, technically speaking, your driver license is still valid. It's one of the post-Brexit agreements, well, considering that you got the test before January the 1st, 2021. But though, you're supposed to convert your license in the country of residence. It's like me, if I go to Spain, I can drive with with the French license, and it's valid. But you're supposed to get things done in the country you're calling home. So even from the UK, you're supposed to get your license exchanged, but you would not feel the rush or the pressure. That's what I'm saying. You do need, I mean, it becomes a requirement when the license expires though. Let's say you have a British license, it's valid in France, you can get it exchanged if you're just a resident, and even if it's not expiring or expired. But if it expires or is about to expire, then you need to convert it into a French one. You cannot renew it in the UK, and then that wouldn't be legal at this stage. So you need to get it converted eventually. So you may as well get it done as quickly as you can. If you come from another non-EU country like the US or Canada, US and Canada mostly are interesting because they have states. Canada doesn't call it a state, but basically, they have sub-regions. It's not managed on a country level. And depending on where you're from, France has different agreements with different states or regions in Canada. And you need to double check that before you move. Because if you anticipate on the issue, there may be ways to work around the issue. Like, I don't know, if you're coming from California from the US, France and California don't have agreements, unfortunately. So that means if you don't do anything, you come to France, well, you'll have to pass the test again in France, even if you're in your 60s or 70s. And believe me, I'm going through my midlife crisis probably. I'm getting my motorbike license, and I wish I didn't have to go through that test again. It's not something I forgot how complex it was. So if you can avoid that, that's probably better. It's probably for the better. But to get back on the issue of the driver license exchange, if you come from Florida, for example, from the US, then Florida does have agreements, for example. So if you're coming from a site that doesn't have agreement, it's best to look into the issue. There are a couple tips and tricks that we can share with you as well to make sure you try to get it done before you move. But please consider this issue before you move, because this is a mandatory requirement though, because, well, apart from UK, which is very specific, I would say thanks for Brexit or post-Brexit agreements in that regard, but any other non-EU site, you need to get the license exchange within the first year. And actually, insurance-wise, car insurance-wise, at the end of that first year, if you didn't do it, your policy will be cancelled, and there'll be a track record history in the French insurance database record, and then every subsequent premiums and policies, and basically that would become a nightmare, and everything will be much more pricey. So this is sometimes overlooked, but this could be an issue. And actually, if you're anticipating on this is a non-event. But if you didn't, it could turn up being a nightmare. So please, well, you can get in touch with us. We're more than happy to provide free consultations and help you understand what you can do about that. But basically, think about this, like driver license exchange, apart from the UK, where there is a bit more flexibility, although they still need to consider it. They have a bit less pressure. Any other than the EU state or country, this potentially could be an issue. So make sure to look into that. Social security application, and for our US friends, this is not the same thing. We're talking about national health care, not pensions. So France allows you after 90 days this time, so you need to have been in France for at least 90 days. After 90 days, France is very generous in that regard. France allows you to apply into the French system, and the application is pretty much for free. Although again, we can help you for a fee, but you can do that for free if you like. You do that through a governmental body that's called the CPAM, C-P-A-M. And it's a document you need to file online-ish, like you can download a PDF and fill it, but it's called a demande d'ouverture de droit. Obviously, it's French wording, but that's like you're requesting for your rights to be opened. And very, very often, the process you're using, not always, if you're setting up a business, if you're employed, that would be a different process, but I'm considering non-workers. You're looking into something called the PUMA, P-U-M-A, Protection Universelle Maladie. This is basically, if you don't have any particular reason to get into the French system, France says, okay, anyone can be covered in France. So if you don't fit into any of the boxes, like I have a business, I'm employed, there are plenty of boxes. Well, the by default box is PUMA, and that's very often your situation. So you get into this, everything is for free. The only implication, depending on the source of income, how much you're making, etc., you might be subject to something called a CSN tax, which is a tax to pay for Social Security if you've never paid for social charges, French social charges in your life. It's often very cheap outside, this tax, if any. I won't get into the details of how to calculate the tax. I'm happy, again, book a free consultation with us. We'll go into the details if you'd like. But just bear in mind that very, very often it's much cheaper than private medical insurance anyway. So it's not a problem, as per se. So yeah, so this is it. CPAM application, demande d'ouverture de droit. And here you go. Or bear in mind, though, a misconception. Many people think after 90 days, they think that they're into the system because they can start the process. No, it's actually a lengthy process. You're in France, guys. So, we have to take the apéro. There is the lunch break. We're on strikes. So it won't happen overnight. But joke aside, I mean, it's kind of a standard process. It depends on how busy they are, also to be taken with a pinch of salt. But you're looking at the 6-month-ish delay. So it's like 9 months total with the 90 days initial waiting period, we could say. So just also, I'm reading through the questions live as well. Resident in Mexico living there full time, can I apply from a French visa where I reside in Mexico? Yes, you can. As I was saying, you can apply from the country of nationality, and you can also apply from the country of residence. So yes, the only difference is obviously if you're from a country where France doesn't have like thousands of expats each year, then you'll be dealing with the French consulate directly, most probably, instead of having to deal with a streamlined process and the subcontractor. Like in the UK, you're dealing with TLS. In the US, you're dealing with VFS. They're like the private subcontractors, so it's very streamlined and very straightforward. But yes, it can be done in the resident. Actually, some people have residency in another EU state, and they don't have to go back to, let's say, the US, for example. The Americans, they can apply straight from the US, straight from the EU state. The only country where you cannot apply for a visa from is France. So, yeah. You mentioned being able to use a previous social security number from the EU. Years ago, I was a resident in Italy and still have my number. How can this be used? It needs to be active. If it was years ago, probably would be inactive. So might not be relevant. Well, if it's inactive, definitely is not relevant. So actually, it's easier to put this way. It's just if you have an active EU number. Yeah. So unfortunately, you probably won't get the deal. So this one, everyone, I'm sure, is eager to speak about taxes. Like, it's only two things certain in life: death and taxes, isn't it? so that's one of the two. But no, joke aside, so another misconception, very often, France, you'd end up paying the same taxes. If you're coming from Canada, US, UK, you probably will end up paying the same kind of taxes as in your own country, and sometimes even less, and often actually even less. What makes France have that bad reputation about taxes is actually social charges. Because, for example, me, if I want to pay myself a 1,000 euros wage, actually, let's say 2,000 euros wage, otherwise 1,000 is under minimum wage, so I couldn't pay myself 1,000. But let's say, for the example, 2,000 euros wage, it's probably going to cost my business 4,000. So it's crazy. Social charges are crazy. And then on top of that, then I'll have, deducted from my net wage, then I'll have to pay national taxes. So yes, total, it's crazy. But this is social charges we're speaking about. So unless you are an employee or you will end up having employees, you will never see that or be concerned by any of these issues. So in terms of national taxes, France is actually quite nice. This is something I like to say. One of the richest men on earth, Bernard Arnault, is French, and he's in Paris and lives in Paris. He didn't move, so that's probably not that bad. But that being said, tax code, if you have a property in France and have bought or buying a property, you will have that automatically. So if not, this is something you need to create manually to be ready for the tax season. And we will highly suggest you get it done as quickly as you can so that you'll have your online account, because that can also facilitate many processes like buying a vehicle or other stuff like that, because then you would have like a France Connect account and things like that. So it would simplify any exchanges you would have with the French administration. So would strongly advise you to do that. Again, we can also help you do it, so more than one way to go. Tax return, it really depends on where you came to France. The rule of thumb for this, well, the tax season is right now, it's like May, June. It's supposed to be May though, otherwise you're late. But the tax season is in May. So if you're in France in May, you're supposed to file a tax return, but not necessarily. I mean, if you arrived in January, the tax return is in regard to the year before. So if you were not in France the year before, you don't have to file a tax return. If you've been in France for more than 6 months, even if you've just been in France for 1 month the year before, well, you can file a tax return, but there is a bit of a tolerance and flexibility. If you've been in France for more than 6 months the year before, so you're in May and the year before you've been in France for more than 6 months, then you need, like mandatory, to file a tax return in France. Okay, so it's kind of simple. Were you in France more than 6 months, actually 183 days the year before? So when you're in May, you look at the past year, where you're in France for 6 months or more. If yes, then you need to file a tax return. Okay, same thing for the tax return. France and UK, US, Canada, most of English-speaking countries, France and these countries have reciprocal agreements and non-dual taxation agreements, which means if you can file a tax return, even if you don't need to, do it, because it would show ultimate commitment for when comes the stage for you to apply for residency. So, and you wouldn't end up paying anyway. If you don't have to buy in France because, well, you were not in France the year before, just a couple of months, then you would not be tax liable in France. That's simple. So I would strongly suggest get a tax return, send a tax return as quickly as you can, because it can help you build. I mean, again, might not be mandatory for all, but may help you build your file when it comes to residency. And final step is that final stage, which is the residency permit. Another misconception is that people tend to think they'll renew their visa, and very often this is inaccurate. Sometimes it is. I mean, if you have a second home in France and just want to keep on renewing your visa because you want to be allowed to stay in France for more than 90 days in your second home, yes, you renew your visa. But a visa is something you need to apply for from abroad, so not from France. Therefore, you usually don't renew a visa. You don't want to go back to your own country every year to renew the visa. Usually you stay in France and you convert, well, actually, you don't renew the visa and then you apply for a residency permit, or it's called in French a carte de séjour. And that you deal in France. The carte de séjour is the residency permit. Well, they keep on changing the name. No, it's a carte de séjour temporaire. That's like, okay. It's a 1-year permit. Requirements are exactly the same as the visa. So as long as your situation is kind of similar, then you'll be good to go. Completely okay for you to have, I don't know, move, change the address, it's completely fine. Even change the reason for your stay. You might have been a non-worker, like with a non-working visa, like a visitor visa, and then now you're running a business and then you apply for a business visa. It's completely fine to do that. Well, you'll have to declare this, but it's completely fine. The thing is, for the residency permit, it's the first time you'll have to deal with the French government. It's the first time they'll see you around, and you have to deal with the French bureaucracy directly for the first time. So they'll try to get the whole process done in French. They have documentation written in different languages, so even if you don't speak French, you'll be fine. There is no such thing as a French test, by the way, apart from certain specific categories of residency permits, but usually there isn't for English-speaking expats. But obviously, that speaking a bit of French might help at this stage, because they'll see that you've made a bit of progress, although this is not mandatory again. Then what happens is, again, to be taken with a pinch of salt, because the residency permit, unlike the visa, is a much more discretionary process. Like, they try to assess how stable your situation in France is. And by definition, this is kind of a subjective assessment. So what usually happens is they grant you a 1-year permit. They'll renew it 2 or 3 times. Okay, so plus the 1-year visa, that's usually 5 years total, like 3 to 5 years, depending on how many times they've renewed it. And then they'll give you a multi-use permit, which is called the carte de résident, but I prefer to say multi-use permit, it's easier. We keep using the same wording. There is relevance and consistency with the English wording. And then eventually that multi-use permit, which often is a 5-year permit, is a one-off permit. So very often, they usually don't renew it unless there is something really wrong. Usually after 5 years, again, considering the situation is kind of the same or similar, then they'll give you then the permanent permit, which is a 10-year permit called the carte de résident permanent, or they changed the name, but basically the logic is this one: like 1-year permit, renewed a couple times, and then the multi-use permit, and then the permanent permit. The permanent permit is it's like a driver license, it's a card, And by the way, the visa is a page in the passport, and the residency permit is like a card, like a driver license card, But then that's it. And you can stick with the residency permit pretty much forever. I have clients which have been on residency permits, like from the US, obviously, because before Brexit, but they've been with the residency permit for 30 years now. So you can just keep on renewing this. And it's like a passport, every 10 years you renew it and good to go. So, I think we did it within 30 minutes. And maybe, Rosine, maybe we can try to deep dive into some of the questions, or...
Yeah, of course we can. Thank you so much, Fabien. Some great tips there. Yes, we have lots of questions coming in. You might notice that we've got Nanny replying to some of them in the comments. That is a member of Fabien's team, so don't be alarmed if you don't recognise the name. So yeah, I'll start firing some across to you. Let me just scroll back to the bottom. Just to confirm, this is a recorded webinar, so you can watch it on demand at a later date if you did start late or want to revisit. Okay, let's have a look. Sorry. How about, so let's go for this one. Gregory's asking, do you need a visa if you're married to an EU passport holder?
Good question. So it depends on where you're coming from and what you would like to do. So like everything, there's more than one way to go. It depends on the specifics. But very often the answer is no. You can actually come to France directly as long as you're traveling together. That would be okay. And you can apply, but you'll need to apply for a residency permit though within the first 90 days. Okay. And there are still some requirements. You still need to make sure you don't have any insurance gaps. So you still need to have medical insurance, because they'll check it at the residency permit application stage, again, so within that first 90 days. And they'll want to make sure that the initial start date of your policy is at least the initial arrival date, because you didn't have a visa, but you were supposed to be covered, or earlier, but they want to make sure that there were no insurance gaps.
Okay, good to know, thank you. And when you were talking about the minimum threshold for the visa requirement, the income requirements, we've had someone ask, when you say couple, obviously it goes up for a couple, is that the same if you're married or unmarried partners, or does that just apply to married couples? No.
As long as they can, so you need to have some form of formal relationship. That could be like a civil partnership, could be marriage, also could be unmarried and no partnership, but then you have a joint bank account. So, but there need to be something formal. Like if you're completely separate, then you're just dating from an official perspective. So then that would be different. But considering that there is at least something like a joint bank account, like a bank account with 2 names, then yes, they'll combine things, and combined, what they're looking for, again, to be taken, in theory, this is per person, but as a couple, very often they're happy with 2,000 euros ongoing income or 24,000 in savings. Okay. When it's savings, especially considering that like 99% of the time, the savings of our clients, they're either in pounds or in US dollars, we strongly suggest to have closer to 30,000, just because you need to cope for the exchange rate, which can vary massively across, the 1 year. So, and also just maybe you have like 24,000 straight, and by the time you go at the interview, the rate has plummeted, and now you no longer have 20. So just to be on the safe side, leave a bit of a margin. But yeah, this is 2,000.
Great, thank you. Will is asking, we're thinking of splitting our time, possibly 5 months in France, 7 months in the UK each year. I'm UK employed, but can work remotely for those 5 months. Do I still need a visa?
Depends on the time frames, because, well, if you're never exceeding 90 days every 180 days in France, then no, you don't need a visa, but then you need to time your visits. But if you do that, you can just stick with the allowance. If you want potentially to do like, 4 months in a row or 5 months in a row, you're kind of like in the same situation as I explained for second home owners, for example. So then in that case, you can have like a 6-month visa or a 12-month visa, depending on your exact plan and when you intend to visit France. So it could be a yes or no kind of answer. It depends on when you intend to come to France, if it's in a row or not.
Okay, so if you spent like January to May in France, that's 5 months in a row, then you would. Okay, good to know. Thank you. We'll move on to Stephen's question. He says, a friend of his is thinking of buying a property outright in France with no mortgage. He is disabled. Will it affect him from buying in France, gaining his full visa, as he plans to make France his permanent home? Sorry, I've missed a bit. He's got PTSD, as he's an ex-soldier. Would that prevent him?
So sorry, from which country?
It doesn't say, but I'm guessing UK.
Okay. Okay. So as a couple, well, so first, because a lot is going on to my mind, disabled state pensions and stuff like that is actually tax-free very often in France, and also makes you eligible to free national health care. So I know it's not a question, but it's relevant. Also, when this is a pension from the force, very often it remains taxable in the home country and is not considered towards the French taxes as well. So, there are some benefits. So that being said, also, there is an implication in terms of the visa process itself. Like national pension from the UK makes the guy eligible to the S1 process, whereas from another country, it's just a pensioner, but it doesn't change anything, apart from the fact that you probably won't have to pay social charges on his income to get French national health care. So that's why I was asking about the country of origin, because and sorry, and I forgot the original question. Then I've digressed. What was the original?
Sorry, I just going past that. I think he was just asking if him having PTSD would affect him buying in France gaining visa.
No, yeah, but that's actually a very good question, because we were talking and referring to that medical exam. The only thing that could disqualify you is having a contagious disease. But we're not talking about even if you come and you have a common cold, that's okay. Like something on the list of WHO, the World Health Organization, labeled as a dangerous contagious disease that they're fighting against, like consumption. But we're really talking about these old school disease, like polio and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. You'll be fine with a cough.
Yeah. No, you should be fine. You should be fine.
Okay. Where are we up to?
Worst case scenario, just go then you're drinking a couple glasses of wine per day, then you're good. But this is a joke, right? This is a joke. No, I'm not telling you to get wasted every day. Although you can come by and have a few drinks with us, we'd be more than happy to have you around.
Oh, on that question, you remind me of one of mine. Whereabouts are your offices?
Yeah, we're in the southwest of France. Well, let's say near Bordeaux, although we're 1.5 hours away from Bordeaux, but we're close to the Spanish border. For those who know, we're very close to a city on the coastline called Biarritz. Biarritz, Bayonne, for those who know. So, yeah, that's where we are, southwest of France.
Okay. And I can see a member of your team's just popped your QR code there for a consultation. How does that happen? Is it a video call or just a telephone call?
Either. Well, I would say both, but not at the same time. Well, although I do prefer the video calls, it's more personal. That's what we're doing today. But yes, you book the consultation and you decide if you want me to call you or have a video call. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And we'll help you understand how it goes, again, from visas to residency to taxes, whatever you'd like to. A small thing, because I've seen a question which I think might be relevant for a lot of viewers in the audience about gîte businesses. It's interesting to know that France has a very large tolerance and does not consider this a business. Well, you could register as a business or file this as business income or whatever. You have options, but you also can stick with the non-working visa and have a gîte business up until 23,000 euros a year for that gîte business or activity. It's safe to consider this a hobby, and like a non-professional activity, and therefore would remain compatible with a non-worker visa, retirement visa. Well, these are all the same. We call that the visitor visa. It's confusing, that name, but it's the non-working visa. So it actually, non-working visa might imply you could still be working. Also for guys which will keep on working, but as remote workers, the visitor visa is also compatible as long as you're not working for a French company or for French clients. So,
Okay, great.
Like late stage couple pro tips for those of you who stick to the end of this session.
Okay, we've got a few more questions coming in. So we've got a question from Christopher. His wife has dual passports, UK and Irish. I have a UK passport. Can we apply for residency without going through the visa process?
Yeah, so Irish, considering Irish passport, yes, again, still, you need to consider medical coverage. So unless they have an Irish social security number active, you still need to go through the insurance until you're part of the French system, so the private insurance, sorry. The difference between the EU and the non-EU spouse, EU spouse doesn't have any requirement, just needs to be insured, whatever the level of cover of the policy, whereas the non-EU spouse will have to meet a level of cover which meets visa or residency applications. But to answer the question directly, the non-EU spouse, sorry, the EU spouse, which has the Irish passport, doesn't have to apply for a visa or residency or anything. Although I would recommend applying for residency just to, for some processes it helps, but it's not mandatory. And the non-EU spouse, on the other hand, will have to apply for a residency permit within 90 days. It's just that neither of them will have to apply for a visa.
Okay, lovely.
Good. And it does, well, for those of you who are married or in partnership with a French citizen, weirdly enough, it makes the process a bit more difficult because, well, the good news is you may be eligible for a 5 years residency permit straight away. But this is one of the rare scenarios when it comes with a French test. For every one of you, like spouse of an EU citizen, or the ones which went through for the visa first and then a 1 year permit and etc., none of you will have to go through the French test. Only the ones, actually there are only 3 categories of people which may need to have to go through the French test. Spouse of a French citizen, parent of a French citizen, this is very, very specific, this one, and the family reunion visa. That we almost never see for English-speaking expats. That is super rare as well, so that's usually only for those who are the spouse or partner of a French citizen. Anyone else? That doesn't apply to you.
Sorry, I was just replying to a question.
No French test as well. Although I would strongly suggest you do, well, learn how to order, un verre de vin, s'il vous plaît, or un café, s'il vous plaît. That's very important to survive in France. But apart from this, it should be good to go.
Okay, I'll cover a couple more and then we'll wrap up. So David's asking, if I was running a geek business in France, how would the social charges affect me?
Good working, sorry. Oh yeah. A geek business. So, well, it depends on the scheme. This one I cannot answer because it varies massively, because you could actually register a business like an LTD. You can register a business like being self-employed or a sole trader, whatever in the US, UK, it's the same thing. Or you could file this directly onto your national taxes, and taxes-wide, it varies massively. So usually, yeah, well, again, and it really depends, and it depends on the turnover. Like if you're making 3,000 or 20,000 or 50,000, we would definitely not advise the same scheme, and the taxes definitely would be different. So very often, considering like a small business, just to give some sort of an answer, you probably will file this onto your national taxes. So not being registered as a business, they'll discount 30% of your turnover, and then they'll tax what's remaining as income. So you'll have to pay a kind of a flat tax for social charges, which is something like 17.2%, I think, plus another flat tax for national income. Roughly, it sums up or totals up to 30%. But you're not taxed 30% of the whole income. They discount at least 30% of it. So, but again, that's to be taken with buckets of salt, because there are so many different schemes. So.
Okay. We've got another question from Stephen. If I'm on a UK pension, do you recommend doing a tax return? Will I then have to pay French tax on this income?
So you always have to find, if you're a French permanent resident, whatever you pay, you end up paying or not French taxes, you always need to file national taxes in France. Otherwise, this is a fraud. So you need to file the taxes. Even though you may file taxes, fine, all of your assets or income are taxable in the UK, in your example, that's fine. You may end up paying zero taxes in France, but it's mandatory to file the taxes, whatever that you're tax liable or not in France, if you are a French permanent resident. So it kind of answers the question. I mean, it's irrelevant to consider whatever will be taxed or not in France. You need to file the taxes no matter what. So, and for this, by the way, we're working with with tax lawyers. Very often, I recommend, because you could book like a 300 euros consultation with these guys, and it's usually worth every penny. It's just 300 euros, and they'll answer all of your questions. You don't have to work with them all the time. You just can book a consultation and get the specifics of your situation addressed, and then you know exactly what to do. But again, it's not mandatory. You can also find that out on your own. So, Rosine, we can hear you. Sorry, your mic's on mute.
Thank you. That is about all we've got time for today in this session. Thank you for all your insightful tips, Fabien. It's been lovely speaking with you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining and hearing us speaking through all of these boring yet instructive, I hope, session. Yeah.
We strongly recommend that you get in touch with Fab French Insurance to discuss your requirements in detail. As Fabien said, we'll be in touch with their details shortly, or you can book a consultation by scanning the QR code. Before we finish, I would like to invite you to leave us a review on Trustpilot if you found this webinar remotely helpful. All the 5 stars count. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us, Fabien. It's been lovely seeing you. And happy property hunting, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Bonne journée.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Bye.